Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. Foundations Built on Lies. Eldridge Williamson stood in his corner office on the 42nd floor, watching the Chicago skyline bleed orange in the dying light. At 38, he commanded respect in the real estate development world. A self-made man who'd clawed his way from a working-class neighborhood to owning a portfolio worth $50 million. His calloused hands, remnants of his construction days, drummed against the mahogany desk as he reviewed blueprints for his latest project. The door opened without a knock. Only one person had that privilege. Working late again, Courtney Williamson glided in, her designer heels clicking against the hardwood. At 34, she possessed the kind of beauty that opened doors and emptied wallets. Blonde hair always perfectly styled, blue eyes that could melt steel when she wanted something. She'd been Courtney Cunningham when they met 6 years ago at a charity gala, a marketing executive for a boutique firm. "Someone has to pay for your shopping trips," Eldridge replied without looking up, though his tone held no malice. It was their usual banter. Courtney perched on the edge of his desk, her red dress riding up slightly. "Speaking of which, I put a deposit down on that lakefront cottage in Wisconsin, the one we looked at last month." Eldridge finally met her eyes. "I thought we agreed to wait until the Riverside project closes." "But Michelle said," she caught herself, color draining from her cheeks. "Michelle said what?" Eldridge's voice remained steady, but something cold flickered behind his dark eyes. "Michelle Pittman, from the bank. He mentioned that lakefront properties are appreciating faster than expected." The lie rolled off her tongue with practiced ease. Eldridge knew Michelle Pittman, 36 years old, senior loan officer at Chicago First National, and the kind of man who wore $1,000 suits to hide his insecurities. More importantly, Eldridge knew Michelle had been handling Courtney's personal account for the past 8 months, ever since she'd insisted on financial independence. "Right," Eldridge said, returning to his blueprints. "We'll talk about it later." Courtney kissed his cheek, her perfume lingering as she left. The same perfume she'd been wearing more frequently lately, something expensive and unfamiliar. That night, Eldridge lay awake beside his sleeping wife, staring at the ceiling of their Gold Coast penthouse. The apartment he'd bought with his first major deal, the one he'd surprised her with on their second anniversary. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. Once. Twice. 3 times. She stirred but didn't wake. At 2:17 a.m., Eldridge made a decision that would change everything. The next morning, he called Jonah Riggs. Jonah operated in the shadows of Chicago's business world, a private investigator whose services came with premium prices and ironclad discretion. They'd worked together before when Eldridge needed background checks on potential business partners. "I need you to look into my wife," Eldridge said without preamble when they met at a diner on the South Side. Jonah, a lean man with prematurely gray hair and eyes that missed nothing, didn't even blink. "How deep?" "Everything. Phone records, credit cards, where she goes, who she sees." Eldridge slid an envelope across the table. "Money's no object." "Timeline, 2 weeks." Jonah pocketed the envelope. "You sure you want to know what I might find?" Eldridge's jaw tightened. "I'm sure." Chapter 2. Cracks in the Foundation. 2 weeks later, Jonah delivered a manila folder that would shatter Eldridge's world. The photographs were damning. Courtney and Michelle in various locations across the city. A lunch at Le Bernardin that lasted 3 hours. Hands intertwined as they walked through Lincoln Park. A kiss outside the Palmer House Hotel that left no room for interpretation. But it was the timeline that truly cut deep. The affair had started 14 months ago, 2 weeks after Eldridge had surprised Courtney with a pearl necklace for their 4th wedding anniversary. "There's more," Jonas said, his voice uncharacteristically gentle. "She's pregnant." Eldridge's coffee cup stopped halfway to his lips. "What?" "8 weeks. I have copies of her medical records from Northwestern." Jonah slid another sheet across the table. The timing. Eldridge studied the dates. 8 weeks ago, he'd been in Vancouver for 2 weeks, finalizing the purchase of a hotel chain. Courtney had claimed she was visiting her sister in Portland. Where was she really? Pittman's cabin in Lake Geneva. I have photos. The folder contained a detailed timeline of deception, business trips that were romantic getaways, charity events that were cover stories, and financial records showing cash withdrawals that funded their affair. But what emerged from Jonah's investigation went deeper than adultery. Michelle Pittman wasn't just a loan officer. He came from old Chicago money, the kind that bought influence and expected deference. His grandfather had been a federal judge, his father a city councilman. Michelle saw himself as nobility, and men like Eldridge as temporary inconveniences. He's been bragging, Jonah continued. My source at the bank says Pittman calls you the blue-collar pretender. Claims he's going to get everything you've built. Eldridge closed the folder. Anything else? Your father-in-law knows. The revelation hit like a physical blow. Edgar Williamson, the man who'd welcomed Eldridge into the family, who'd stood as best man at their wedding, who'd taught him to play chess on Sunday afternoons. Edgar knew his daughter was destroying their marriage and had said nothing. How long has he known? At least 6 months. There's a bank record of him co-signing a loan for Pittman's business expansion. They've been planning something. Eldridge walked out of that diner a different man. The boy who believed in fairness and second chances died in a booth on the South Side. What emerged was something harder, colder, a man who understood that mercy was a luxury he could no longer afford. That evening, Courtney greeted him with unusual enthusiasm, wearing the pearl necklace he'd given her for their anniversary. I have wonderful news, she said, her eyes bright with deception. Oh, I'm pregnant. She watched his face carefully, gauging his reaction. Eldridge smiled, the same smile he used in business negotiations when he held all the cards. That's incredible news. He kissed her gently, tasting lies on her lips. We should celebrate. As they sat in their favorite restaurant, Courtney spoke animatedly about baby names and nursery themes. Eldridge nodded and smiled, already calculating his next moves. In the reflection of the restaurant window, he caught sight of Michelle Pittman at a corner table, watching them with undisguised hatred. Let him watch, Eldridge thought. Soon, there would be so much more to see. Chapter 3. The Opening Gambit. Divorce papers were filed quietly on a Tuesday morning in November. Eldridge's attorney, Sherman Robles, was a shark in an expensive suit, the kind of lawyer who viewed court battles as blood sport. She'll fight for everything, Sherman warned during their strategy session. The penthouse, the business assets, alimony. With the pregnancy, a judge might be sympathetic. Let her try, Eldridge replied. I want this done fast and clean. No custody battles, no extended proceedings. Give her whatever she asks for. Sherman's eyebrows rose. That's unusual. Most men in your position fight tooth and nail. Most men don't know what I know. Courtney's reaction was theatrical. She collapsed in their living room, tears streaming down her perfect cheeks. How could you do this to us? To our baby. The baby isn't mine, Eldridge said simply. The color drained from her face. What are you talking about? I know about Michelle. I know about Lake Geneva. I know about everything. His voice remained calm, almost gentle. The question is, do you want to do this the easy way or the hard way? Courtney's tears dried instantly, replaced by something cold and calculating. You can't prove anything. Eldridge pulled out his phone and played a recording. Her voice filled the room, crystal clear. Eldridge is so stupid. He actually thinks the baby is his. Michelle, you're brilliant for suggesting I stay married until the divorce settlement. We'll get millions. The recording continued for several more damning minutes. I have hours of these, Eldridge said, along with photos, financial records, and witness statements. Your boyfriend isn't as careful as he thinks. Courtney's mask finally slipped, revealing the ugly truth beneath. You bastard. You think you're so clever? You have no idea what you're dealing with. Michelle's family has connections you can't imagine. We'll destroy you. You're welcome to try. The divorce proceedings moved with unprecedented speed. Courtney, realizing the recordings would destroy her in court, accepted a settlement that seemed generous but contained carefully crafted language that would prove crucial later. She kept the lakefront cottage, valued at $800,000, received $2 million in cash and retained rights to their shared business investments. What she didn't realize was that Eldridge had structured the settlement to leave her exposed to future financial obligations. Meanwhile, Edgar Williamson remained silent, continuing their chess games as if nothing had changed. During their final game before the divorce was finalized, Edgar made an unexpected move. "You know, I've always thought of you as the son I never had," he said, advancing his queen. "I know." Eldridge moved his knight, setting up a trap Edgar couldn't see. "Courtney made mistakes. We all make mistakes. Some mistakes can't be forgiven." Eldridge's tone remained conversational. Edgar leaned back in his chair. "She's still my daughter. Blood is thicker than water." "Blood," Eldridge repeated thoughtfully. "Checkmate." Edgar stared at the board in confusion. He'd been 2 moves away from victory, and somehow Eldridge had turned the game completely around. "I don't understand. How did you?" "You weren't paying attention to the pieces you couldn't see," Eldridge said, standing. "Thanks for teaching me chess, Edgar. The lessons were more valuable than you know." On the day the divorce was finalized, Eldridge stood alone in his attorney's office, signing the papers that legally severed his connection to Courtney. But legal documents were just paper. The real game was about to begin. That afternoon, he placed a call to Dorian Dawson, a real estate developer who specialized in luxury properties. "I want to buy a specific apartment building," Eldridge said. "Price is no object." The building in question was a converted warehouse in River North, the same building where Michelle Pittman had been secretly paying rent on a private apartment for the past year. The apartment he used for his encounters with Courtney and God knows who else. "I can have the papers drawn up by Friday," Dorian confirmed. "Make it Thursday," Eldridge said. "And Dorian? I want every rental agreement in that building transferred to my personal management company. Every single one. By Thursday evening, Eldridge owned the building and had legal control over every lease agreement. Michelle Pittman would discover this fact in 30 days, when his first eviction notice arrived. But that was just the opening move. Chapter 4, The Baby Shower Gambit. 4 months later, the invitation arrived on cream-colored cardstock with elegant script. "You're invited to celebrate baby Williamson Pittman." The hypocrisy was breathtaking. Courtney had kept his name for the settlement benefits, but publicly flaunted her relationship with Michelle. The baby shower was held at Edgar and Louise Williamson's estate in Winnetka, a sprawling Tudor mansion that had hosted 3 generations of family celebrations. Eldridge arrived precisely on time, carrying a modest gift bag and wearing his most disarming smile. The guest list read like a who's who of Chicago society. Courtney held court in the center of the living room, her hand resting on her 7-month belly, accepting congratulations and gifts with practiced grace. Michelle stood beside her like a conquering hero, his arm possessively around her waist. "Eldridge!" Louise Williamson rushed to greet him, her voice overly bright with nervous energy. "I'm so glad you came. This shows such maturity." "I wouldn't miss it," Eldridge replied, kissing her cheek. Family is family. The afternoon proceeded with typical baby shower activities, gift opening, games, and polite conversation that carefully avoided mentioning the obvious tensions. Eldridge mingled easily, accepting congratulations on his gracious handling of the situation and deflecting questions about his future plans. It was during the gift opening ceremony that Edgar made his move. "Before we continue," Edgar announced, commanding the room's attention, "there's a special gift from all of us." He produced a large frame covered by silk cloth, something to help Courtney and Michelle start their new life together. With theatrical flourish, he pulled away the cloth to reveal a framed property deed. "A gift from all of us," Edgar repeated, his voice thick with emotion. "Your new home." Courtney gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. The gathering erupted in applause and congratulations. Michelle beamed with pride, accepting handshakes and backslaps from the other men. Eldridge moved closer to examine the deed, his expression curious but calm. The document was genuine, a transfer of ownership for a luxury apartment in Lincoln Park, valued at $1.2 million. But as his eyes scanned the legal description, something cold settled in his stomach. The address was familiar. Too familiar. It was the apartment he'd purchased 3 years ago as an investment property. The apartment he'd paid off in full, with his own money, using funds from his first major development deal. The apartment he'd bought before his marriage to Courtney, which legally made it his separate property. Edgar leaned in close, his voice low enough that only Eldridge could hear. "You have 30 days to vacate." The words hit like a physical blow. Eldridge stared at his father-in-law, the man who'd taught him chess, who'd shared whiskey and war stories, who'd welcomed him into the family with open arms. The betrayal was complete. But Eldridge's face remained serene, his smile never wavering. "One day is enough," he said quietly. The party continued around them, but Eldridge barely heard the laughter and conversation. His mind was already working, calculating, planning. By the time he left the estate that evening, he'd made 17 phone calls and set in motion a chain of events that would reshape everything. At 5:47 a.m. the next morning, a convoy of removal trucks pulled up to the Lincoln Park apartment building. The crew chief, a burly man named Roger Sherman who specialized in rapid property clearing, checked his clipboard one final time before giving the signal. "Strip it clean," he told his team. "Everything that's not nailed down, and half the stuff that is." They worked with military precision. Custom cabinets that had cost $30,000 to install, gone. Italian marble countertops, carefully removed and loaded onto trucks. Hardwood flooring that Eldridge had personally selected, pulled up board by board. Light fixtures, bathroom fixtures, the high-end washer and dryer from the utility room. Everything that could be legally removed as Eldridge's personal property disappeared into the trucks. By noon, the apartment was stripped to bare walls and concrete floors. The crew even took the custom window treatments and the imported tiles from the bathrooms. The legal grounds were solid. As the original purchaser and title holder, Eldridge had the right to remove any improvements he'd personally installed. The property deed Edgar had transferred was legitimate, but it only included the basic structure, not the $150,000 in upgrades that had made it a luxury residence. At 6:41 p.m., Louise Williamson's text arrived. "Is this a joke?" Eldridge smiled as he typed his response. "Not yet, but tomorrow's delivery might be." He was sitting in his temporary downtown apartment, surrounded by boxes and planning documents. The view wasn't as nice as the penthouse he'd given up in the divorce, but it served his purposes. On the coffee table lay blueprints, legal documents, and a shipping manifest that would arrive at Edgar and Louise's estate the following morning. What he'd arranged for delivery would make the apartment stripping look like a warm-up act. Chapter 5. The Delivery. At 8:15 a.m., Edgar Williamson was enjoying his morning coffee when the first truck arrived. He watched through the bay window as uniformed workers began unloading what appeared to be construction materials. The delivery slip was addressed to him personally. By 8:30, the front yard of the Winnetka estate was filled with the contents of the stripped Lincoln Park apartment. Not just filled, artfully arranged. The marble countertops formed a perfect semicircle around the fountain. The hardwood flooring was stacked in neat pyramids on the manicured lawn. The custom cabinets created a makeshift outdoor kitchen beside the rose garden that Louise had tended for 20 years. But Eldridge hadn't stopped there. A second truck arrived carrying a team of workers who began assembling something that made Edgar's blood run cold. A fully functional construction site trailer, complete with portable toilets, a cement mixer, and industrial scaffolding that now towered over the estate's carefully manicured landscape. The third truck delivered the piece de resistance, a 50-foot construction crane that they were legally permitted to install because, according to the building permits Eldridge had filed, the estate was now designated as an active construction zone. "What the hell is this?" Edgar demanded when the crew chief approached with a clipboard. "Construction staging area," the man replied, consulting his paperwork. "Says here you're doing a major renovation. Permits are all in order." Edgar snatched the documents. The permits were legitimate, bearing the official stamps of the city planning department. But the project description made no sense. Demolition and reconstruction of detached garage and guest house. Timeline, 6 to 8 months. "I never authorized any construction," Edgar protested. "Don't know about that, sir. I just deliver what I'm told to deliver." The crew chief pointed to a signature on the bottom of the permit application. That's your signature, right? Edgar stared at the signature. It was his handwriting, but he'd never signed any such document. Except the memory came flooding back. 3 months ago, Michel had brought a stack of papers for him to sign. Loan documents, he'd said, for the business expansion. Edgar had been rushing to a golf appointment and had signed without reading carefully. His phone buzzed with an incoming call from his next-door neighbor, Lee Fernandez, a prominent attorney who'd lived in Winnetka for 30 years. Edgar, what in God's name is happening over there? There's a crane in your front yard. Before Edgar could respond, Louise came running from the house, her face pale with shock. The neighbors are calling. Mrs. Chun from the Homeowners Association is on her way over. Edgar, what have you done? What he'd done was trust the wrong people. By 10 a.m., the estate looked like a war zone. The construction equipment dominated the landscape, effectively blocking access to the garage and making the property unusable for any normal activities. Worse, the permits were ironclad, legally filed and properly approved, giving Eldridge the right to use the property as a staging area for the next 6 to 8 months. Michel arrived at noon, his Mercedes forced to park on the street because the driveway was blocked by stacks of building materials. His face was red with rage as he stormed toward Edgar. You signed the permits, Michel said without preamble. The bank called. The construction loan you co-signed has been activated, and they need immediate access to the property for the renovation project. What construction loan? Edgar demanded. Michel's confident expression faltered. The loan you co-signed 3 months ago, for the garage renovation and guest house expansion. I never signed any. Edgar stopped mid-sentence as the truth hit him. The papers Michel had brought him, the ones he'd signed in a hurry. They hadn't been loan documents for Michel's business. They'd been construction permits and financial guarantees for a renovation project that didn't exist. You son of a bitch, Edgar whispered. But Michel wasn't listening. He was staring at something beyond Edgar's shoulder, his face going white. Following his gaze, Edgar turned to see a familiar figure standing beside the construction crane. Eldridge Williamson smiled and waved. Gentlemen, Eldridge called out, walking toward them with casual confidence. I hope you're enjoying the delivery. I wanted to make sure you received everything in good condition. You can't do this, Michel sputtered. This is illegal. It's harassment. Actually, it's completely legal, Eldridge replied. Your father-in-law signed all the necessary permits. The construction loan he co-signed provides me with full access to the property for the duration of the project. Edgar's voice was barely a whisper. What do you want? I want you to understand something, Eldridge said, his smile never wavering. Yesterday, you thought you could humiliate me in front of your family and friends. You thought you could steal my property and hand it to your daughter and her boyfriend. You thought I would just accept it and walk away. He gestured to the chaos surrounding them. This is me not walking away. Louise appeared at Edgar's side, her face streaked with tears. Eldridge, please. This is madness. We can work this out. We could have worked it out, Eldridge agreed. Before yesterday. Before you chose them over me. His voice hardened. Before you forgot that I'm not the same man you met 6 years ago. I'm something much more dangerous now. He turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and Michel, you might want to check your rental apartment. I think you'll find the locks have been changed. As Eldridge walked away, Edgar felt something crack inside his chest. The well-ordered world he'd built, the careful plans he'd made, the family legacy he'd tried to protect, all of it was crumbling around him. And they hadn't even seen the worst of it yet. Chapter 6, The Trap Springs. The eviction notice arrived at Michel's River North apartment on a Tuesday morning, served by a process server who found him in his bathrobe, frantically searching for clean clothes. The lock change had been just the beginning. Eldridge had used his ownership of the building to make Michel's life a living hell. 30 days, the process server said, handing over the legal documents. Buildings being converted to condominiums. Michel stared at the notice, his hands shaking with rage. The apartment had been his sanctuary, his private space away from the prying eyes of Chicago society. Now, it was being torn away, just like everything else. But the eviction was merely one piece of a larger puzzle that Eldridge had been assembling for months. At Chicago First National, Michel discovered that his position as senior loan officer was under review following irregularities in several high-profile accounts. The irregularities weren't fabricated. They were real problems that Michel had been sloppy enough to create through his arrogance and lack of attention to detail. The Patterson account shows 3 unauthorized extensions, his supervisor, Aubrey Hull, explained during their meeting. The Morrison loan has documentation gaps, and the Williamson construction permits. Aubrey shook his head. Jesus, Michel, what were you thinking? Michel's blood ran cold. What about the Williamson permits? You processed them personally. Construction permits for a project that turns out to be financially backed by the same man whose property was involved in the original permit application. It looks like Aubrey searched for the right words. It looks like fraud, Michel, or at minimum, gross negligence. The truth was more complex. Eldridge had legally purchased Edgar's debt when the older man defaulted on the construction loan, a default that occurred when Edgar realized he'd been tricked into signing documents he didn't understand. As the new creditor, Eldridge had every right to foreclose on the estate and use it as collateral for his own projects. Michel had processed the paperwork without realizing he was facilitating his own destruction. That evening, Michel drove to Courtney's temporary apartment, a modest 2-bedroom in Lincoln Park that was a far cry from the luxury she'd grown accustomed to. She was 8 months pregnant now, her belly prominent, her face puffy with stress and tears. "They're saying you might lose your job," she said without preamble when he walked through the door. "It's a misunderstanding. I can fix this." "With what money?" Courtney's voice rose to near hysteria. "The apartment is gone. Your job is in jeopardy, and my father won't return my calls because his house looks like a construction site." Michel tried to take her in his arms, but she pulled away. "This was supposed to be easy, Michel. You said Eldridge was just a blue-collar nobody who got lucky. You said your family's connections would protect us. They will. My father still has influence. Your father hasn't returned your calls in 2 weeks." Courtney's laugh was bitter and sharp. "Face it, Michel. We're losing." That night, alone in his hotel room, Michel made a decision that would prove to be his final mistake. He called Nestor Drake, a private investigator who specialized in the kind of work that respectable people didn't discuss in polite company. "I need you to find something on Eldridge Williamson," Michel said. "Something that will destroy him. Price is no object." Nestor, a thin man with pale eyes and a reputation for getting results through any means necessary, listened carefully to Michel's requirements. "That kind of investigation requires creative methods. Not everything will be admissible in court." "I don't care about court," Michel replied. "I just want him destroyed." What Michel didn't know was that Nestor Drake had been on Eldridge's payroll for the past 6 months. Every conversation, every plan, every desperate scheme was being recorded and reported back to the man they were trying to destroy. The trap was closing, and Michel had just walked into the final snare. 3 days later, Eldridge received a phone call that made him smile with genuine pleasure. "It's done," Jonah Riggs said. "Pittman just hired Drake to investigate you." The conversation was recorded from start to finish. Did he take the bait about the illegal surveillance? Hook, line, and sinker. He authorized Drake to break into your office, hack your computers, and photograph your personal documents. All clearly documented. Eldridge leaned back in his chair, savoring the moment. And the other matter? Courtney's medical records show stress-related complications. The doctor is recommending bed rest for the remainder of her pregnancy. The pieces were falling into place perfectly. Soon, Michel and Courtney would discover that their attempt to destroy Eldridge had instead provided him with everything he needed to destroy them legally, financially, and socially. But Eldridge's plan went deeper than simple revenge. He was about to teach them that some games have no winners, only survivors. Chapter 7. The Reckoning Begins. The first domino fell on a Friday morning when FBI agents arrested Michel Pittman at his office. The charges were federal: conspiracy to commit wire fraud, attempted industrial espionage, and violation of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. The evidence was overwhelming. Hidden cameras in Eldridge's office had captured Michel's hired investigator, Nestor Drake, attempting to install surveillance equipment. Wiretaps, legally obtained through federal court orders, had recorded dozens of conversations in which Michelle explicitly authorized illegal activities. But the masterstroke was Eldridge's manipulation of the electronic evidence. For months, he'd been feeding false information through channels he knew Michelle was monitoring. Financial records showing hidden offshore accounts, business documents detailing fictional illegal activities, and communications that painted him as a corrupt businessman willing to break any law for profit. Michelle had taken the bait eagerly, directing Drake to steal these fabricated documents as evidence of Eldridge's corruption. In doing so, he committed multiple federal crimes while pursuing evidence that would have been worthless in court. The irony is beautiful, Sherman Robles explained to Eldridge as they watched news coverage of Michelle's arrest. He destroyed himself trying to destroy you with evidence you created specifically for that purpose. Courtney's reaction was swift and predictable. She arrived at Eldridge's downtown office that afternoon, her face streaked with tears, her pregnant belly making her movements awkward and desperate. "Please," she begged, bursting past his secretary without announcement. "I know you're behind this. Michelle might have made mistakes, but this is destroying our family." Eldridge looked up from his desk, his expression calm and unmoved. "Your family was destroyed the moment you decided to betray mine. The baby is innocent in all this. The baby isn't mine." His voice was ice-cold fact. "And even if it were, you made your choice 14 months ago when you decided my love wasn't enough." Courtney collapsed into the chair across from his desk, her sobs echoing through the office. "What do you want? Money? I'll sign over everything from the divorce settlement. Just make this stop. I don't want your money, Courtney. I want you to understand what it feels like to lose everything you thought was secure." Eldridge stood and moved to the window, his back to her. "You and Michelle thought you were so clever, taking my property, humiliating me in front of my family, treating me like some temporary inconvenience to be swept aside." He turned to face her, and she flinched at what she saw in his eyes. "You forgot that I built everything I have from nothing. I know how to tear things down just as efficiently as I build them up. This isn't just about me anymore," Courtney said desperately. "My father's lost his house, his reputation, his standing in the community. My mother had a heart attack from the stress. You're destroying innocent people." "Innocent?" Eldridge's laugh was harsh and bitter. "Your father knew about the affair for 6 months and said nothing. He conspired to steal my property and hand it to you and your boyfriend. He chose his side, Courtney, just like you did. And what about forgiveness? What about the man I married who believed in second chances? That man died the day I discovered your betrayal." Eldridge returned to his desk, dismissing her with his indifference. "You can show yourself out." That evening, Eldridge sat in his sparse apartment, reading news coverage of the scandal that was consuming Chicago's social circles. Michelle's arrest had made the front page of both major newspapers, complete with photos of him being led away in handcuffs. But the real damage was just beginning. The investigation into Michelle's affairs had uncovered a web of financial improprieties at Chicago First National. Loans approved without proper documentation, investment advice given based on insider information, and a pattern of ethical violations that painted the entire Pittman family in an unfavorable light. Michelle's father, Judge Harrison Pittman, announced his early retirement from the federal bench pending an ethics investigation. His grandfather's name was being removed from the charitable foundation that had been the family's pride for 3 generations. The Pittman legacy, built over a century of careful reputation management and strategic political connections, was crumbling in real time. And Eldridge wasn't finished. His phone rang at 11:47 p.m. The caller ID showed Edgar Williamson's number. "You've made your point." Edgar's voice was hollow, defeated. "What more do you want?" "I want you to admit what you did." "I know what I did. I chose my daughter over—" "No," Eldridge interrupted. "You chose wealth and status over integrity. You chose what you thought was easy over what you knew was right. You chose to believe that I was weak enough to accept being stabbed in the back by my own family." The line was quiet for a long moment. When Edgar spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper. "What can I do to make this right?" "Nothing," Eldridge replied. "You can't unmake the choices you've made. just like I can't unmake mine. He hung up and returned to his reading. Tomorrow would bring new developments, new consequences for the people who'd thought they could destroy him without facing any repercussions. But tonight, for the first time in months, Eldridge Williamson slept peacefully. Chapter 8. Aftermath and Consequences. 6 weeks later, the full scope of Eldridge's revenge had become clear to everyone involved. Michelle Pittman pleaded guilty to federal conspiracy charges and was sentenced to 4 years in minimum security prison. His conviction triggered a cascade of consequences that reached far beyond his personal situation. Chicago First National faced federal investigation and massive civil lawsuits. The bank stock price plummeted 40% in 3 days, wiping out millions in shareholder value. 3 senior executives, including Michelle's direct supervisor, resigned in disgrace. The Pittman family's social standing collapsed entirely. Judge Harrison Pittman's early retirement became permanent disgrace when ethics investigators discovered he'd used his position to facilitate several of his son's questionable business deals. The family estate in Lake Forest went up for auction to pay legal fees and civil judgments. But it was Edgar and Louise Williamson who bore the heaviest burden of Eldridge's methodical destruction. The construction loan Edgar had unknowingly co-signed contained acceleration clauses that triggered when Michelle's criminal conviction became final. Eldridge, as the legal holder of the debt, demanded immediate payment of the full amount, $2.3 million, plus accumulated interest and penalties. Edgar's attorney, Dana LeBlanc, tried desperately to negotiate a settlement. Mr. Williamson, your client's demands are excessive. My client was clearly deceived about the nature of the documents he signed. Your client signed legal documents without reading them, Sherman Robles replied coolly. His financial incompetence doesn't void his legal obligations. The Winnetka estate, Edgar's family home for 37 years, was seized to satisfy the debt. Louise's 20-year garden was bulldozed to make way for a luxury development project that Eldridge designed personally. The new townhomes would be marketed as Williamson Commons. Louise's heart attack, brought on by the stress of losing her home, required emergency surgery and months of recovery. Medical bills consumed what little savings they had left after the foreclosure. Edgar, once a proud pillar of Chicago society, now lived in a modest apartment in Schaumburg and worked as a part-time consultant for a property management company. The chess set they'd shared for years sat and used in a box in his closet, too painful a reminder of better times. Courtney's situation was perhaps the most tragic. 9 months pregnant and facing financial ruin, she moved back to her childhood bedroom in the apartment her parents rented after losing their home. The stress of the scandal triggered early labor complications that required an emergency C-section. The baby, a girl she named Hope, was born healthy but immediately became a symbol of everything that had gone wrong. Michel couldn't be present for the birth. He was already serving his federal sentence. The child's birth certificate listed only Courtney as the parent. I've lost everything, Courtney confessed to her mother as they sat in the cramped apartment, surrounded by moving boxes and unpaid bills. My marriage, my home, my family's reputation, my future, all because I made one terrible mistake. Several terrible mistakes, Louise corrected gently but firmly. And not just you. We all made choices that led us here. Courtney's financial situation was dire. The divorce settlement money had been spent on legal fees and medical bills. The lakefront cottage she'd received was underwater on its mortgage due to declining property values, a decline that wasn't accidental but the result of Eldridge purchasing and demolishing 3 neighboring properties, destroying the area's appeal to luxury buyers. She applied for assistance programs she'd never imagined needing. Food stamps, Medicaid, subsidized housing, the safety net that caught people when they fell from grace. The social fall was equally devastating. Former friends crossed the street to avoid her. Country club memberships were quietly revoked. Invitations to charity galas and social events stopped arriving. Courtney Williamson, who had once been featured in Chicago magazines, Rising Stars Under 40, was now a cautionary tale whispered about in the same social circles that had once celebrated her. But Eldridge's revenge extended beyond financial and social destruction. He'd systematically dismantled every relationship, every connection, every source of support that his enemies had relied upon. Boyd Williamson, Edgar's younger son and Eldridge's former brother-in-law, discovered that his law practice was losing clients after word spread about the family's connection to the scandal. His partnership at a prestigious downtown firm was quietly dissolved. The ripple effects continued expanding, touching everyone who had chosen sides against Eldridge or remained silent when they should have spoken up. Only Jonah Riggs, the private investigator who had started this chain of events with his manila folder, remained untouched. He'd been paid handsomely for his work and had wisely invested the money in properties that Eldridge didn't control. "You got your revenge," Jonah observed during their final meeting. "The question is, was it worth it?" Eldridge considered the question seriously. His former life was gone completely. The marriage, the family connections, the social relationships that had defined his identity for 6 years. But something new had taken their place. "Ask me in 5 years," he replied. Chapter 9. The Last Smile. 1 year later, Eldridge stood in the penthouse of his newest building, a 40-story tower that dominated the Chicago skyline. The view from his office encompassed the entire city, including the neighborhoods where his former enemies now struggled to rebuild their shattered lives. The construction of Williamson Commons had been completed 6 months ahead of schedule. The luxury townhomes sold within days of going on the market, generating profits that exceeded even Eldridge's aggressive projections. Where Edgar's family estate once stood, young professionals now paid premium prices to live in what had become one of Chicago's most desirable addresses. The irony wasn't lost on anyone who knew the history. Eldridge's business empire had grown exponentially during the year of his revenge. The chaos he'd created in his personal life had somehow focused his professional energy with laser precision. 3 major developments, 2 hotel acquisitions, and a commercial real estate portfolio that doubled in value. Success, it turned out, was indeed the best revenge. His secretary announced a visitor, Sherman Robles, the attorney who had helped orchestrate much of the legal maneuvering that made the revenge possible. "I have news about the Pittman situation," Sherman said, settling into the chair across from Eldridge's massive desk. Michelle's appealing his sentence. His new attorney thinks they can get it reduced based on mental health factors. "Let them try," Eldridge replied without looking up from his documents. The evidence was overwhelming, and federal judges don't like defendants who commit crimes against the same people trying to help them. "There's something else." Sherman hesitated. "Courtney's filed for bankruptcy. She's also applied for permission to change the baby's last name from Pittman to Cunningham, her maiden name." This got Eldridge's attention. Trying to distance herself from Michelle's conviction, trying to distance her daughter from the whole mess. The kid's going to grow up with enough baggage without carrying the Pittman name. Eldridge returned to his paperwork, but Sherman wasn't finished. "Edgar's been asking about you, through intermediaries. He wants to know if there's any possibility of reconciliation." "No." "He's willing to admit his mistakes publicly. Make a formal apology. Whatever you want. I want him to live with the consequences of his choices," Eldridge said flatly. "Just like I live with mine." Sherman studied his client carefully. "You know, there are people who think you went too far, that your revenge was disproportionate to the offense." Eldridge finally looked up, his dark eyes meeting Sherman's. "Those people have never been betrayed by everyone they trusted. They've never discovered that their marriage was a lie, their family was fake, and their love was just another asset to be divided in a settlement. And now I know exactly where I stand with everyone in my life." Eldridge gestured toward the cityscape beyond his windows. "These buildings don't lie to me. These contracts don't cheat on me. This money doesn't pretend to love me while planning to destroy me." Sherman gathered his papers, recognizing the dismissal in Eldridge's tone. "For what it's worth, I think you won. Completely and absolutely." After Sherman left, Eldridge remained at his desk as the sun set over Chicago. His phone showed 17 missed calls and 43 unread messages. Investors, contractors, politicians, and society figures who wanted something from a man who'd become one of the city's most powerful real estate developers. But there were no personal calls, no family messages, no friends checking in just to say hello. That evening, he drove to a small cemetery in suburban Oak Park where his mother was buried. She died when he was 24, before he'd become wealthy, before he'd met Courtney, before everything had gone so spectacularly wrong. "I kept my promise," he said to the weathered headstone. "I built something that mattered, something that lasted." He paused, thinking about everything that had happened. "I just didn't realize how much it would cost." The wind picked up, rustling the leaves of the oak tree that shaded her grave. In the distance, the lights of Chicago twinkled like stars, each one representing someone's hopes, dreams, and struggles. Eldridge's phone buzzed with another message. Another opportunity, another deal, another chance to add to his empire. He ignored it. For the first time in years, he had nothing urgent to do and nowhere important to be. The revenge was complete. His enemies were destroyed. His empire was secure. So why did he feel so empty? The answer came to him as he walked back to his car. Victory without witnesses was meaningless. Revenge without the possibility of redemption was hollow. Power without love was just expensive loneliness. But these were philosophical concerns for another day. Tonight, Eldridge Williamson would return to his penthouse, pour himself an expensive drink, and plan his next conquest. Because building empires was what he did now, the only thing he had left to do. In another part of the city, Courtney sat in her cramped apartment, holding her sleeping daughter and wondering what kind of future awaited a child born from such destruction. Edgar stared at his chessboard, unable to focus on the game that had once brought him joy. Michelle counted days in a federal prison, dreaming of redemption that might never come. They were all casualties of a war that had no winners, only survivors. And in his glass tower above the city, Eldridge Williamson smiled his last smile. Not because he was happy, but because happiness was a luxury he could no longer afford. He had chosen power over love, revenge over forgiveness, and victory over peace. Now he would live with those choices forever. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there. Hello and welcome back to Infidelity Tales Lab. We're grateful for each view and comment. Tell us, from which country or city are you watching today? We enjoy connecting with our global audience. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. Iron Fortress. Lawrence Merritt, known to most as Law, was not a man built on compromise. At 42, he had carved his legacy with calloused hands and an unforgiving mind. The scars on his knuckles told stories of battles fought long before he became owner of Ironclad Security, the most elite private security firm in Boston. The December wind bit through his tailored overcoat as he left the office. Snow gathered on the shoulders of his 6'3" frame, melting against the heat that seemed to perpetually radiate from his body. His employees called it the Merritt burn, the intensity he carried like a second skin. Heading home early, "Boss?" asked Garrett Sullivan, his head of operations. The man had served with Law and the Rangers before joining his security business. "Anniversary," Law replied, checking his watch, a Rolex his wife Natalie had given him 5 years ago. 15 years. Hard to believe. Garrett's expression shifted subtly. Law caught it. He caught everything. "Something wrong?" "No, just surprised. Didn't think you were the anniversary type." Garrett's eyes dropped to his computer screen too quickly. Law lingered a moment longer than necessary. After 15 years in special operations and another 10 running a security company, he developed an uncanny ability to sense when something was off. But he dismissed it. Natalie was waiting, and despite his demanding nature, she'd never given him reason to doubt her. Their marriage was the one fortress he believed impenetrable. "See you Monday," he said, turning away. The drive to their colonial-style home in Newton took 30 minutes. Law used the time to mentally transition from the cutthroat business world to husband mode. Natalie deserved that much. She'd stood by him when he'd returned from his final deployment with nightmares and a temper he couldn't always control. She'd supported him when he started ironclad with nothing but his military connections and a ruthless determination to succeed. As he turned onto his street, his phone buzzed. A text from his younger brother, Russell. Need to talk. It's important. Law frowned. Russell, 10 years his junior, was the family screw-up, always in some kind of trouble. He silenced the phone. Whatever drama Russell had created could wait until after his anniversary. He pulled into the driveway of the home he and Natalie had renovated together. 3 bedrooms they'd never filled with children, a mutual decision after Law's childhood. Growing up with Vernon and Patricia Merritt had taught him families sometimes cause more pain than they're worth. The house was dark. Law checked his watch again, 7:30 p.m. Natalie's car wasn't in the driveway. He entered through the front door, calling her name. No answer. On the kitchen counter sat a note in her elegant handwriting. Working late. Don't wait up. In. Law's jaw tightened. This wasn't like her. Not on their anniversary. He pulled out his phone and called her office at Boston General Hospital, where she worked as a neurologist. Dr. Merritt left at 5, replied the night nurse. Law hung up without another word. The coil of suspicion that had started with Garrett's odd behavior tightened in his gut. He dialed Natalie's cell. It went straight to voicemail. That's when he noticed it. Her rarely used Chanel perfume lingering in the air. She'd been home recently and changed. Law moved through the house systematically, checking rooms with the precision of his military training. Nothing seemed out of place until he reached their bedroom. The closet door was ajar, and Natalie's overnight bag was missing. The uneasy feeling crystallized into something sharper. He opened her dresser drawer, several items gone. He checked the bathroom. Her essential toiletries missing. This wasn't a late night at work. This was something else. He sat on the edge of the bed, his mind racing through possibilities when his phone rang. Russell again. This time, Law answered. I've been trying to reach you. Russell's voice was tight. Law, there's something you need to know about Natalie. Chapter 2. Ruins. Law's hands gripped the steering wheel as he tore through the empty streets toward Russell's apartment in Cambridge. His brother's words had been cryptic but devastating. I've seen Natalie with someone. Multiple times. I didn't want to believe it, but today I overheard them talking about leaving. Tonight. I'm sorry, Law. The streetlights cast intermittent glows across his face, highlighting the hard angles of his clenched jaw. He hadn't asked questions. Russell knew better than to make accusations without proof. Law parked haphazardly outside Russell's building and took the stairs 2 at a time. Russell opened the door before he could knock, his face pale. Show me, Law demanded. Russell led him to a laptop. I took these last week. I was at Bonder having lunch when I saw them. The photos showed Natalie sitting across from a man Law didn't recognize, tall, blonde, professionally dressed. In one image, the man's hand covered Natalie's on the table. Who is he? His name is Alexander Voss. He's a pharmaceutical executive. I did some digging. Russell handed Law a folder. They've been seen together for at least 6 months. Law flipped through public records and social media screenshots. Alexander Voss, 38, divorced, no children. Chief Marketing Officer at Helix Pharmaceuticals. There's more, Russell said quietly. Today I followed them to their meeting spot. I heard them talking about a property sale. Your property, Law. Law's head snapped up. What property? The lake house in New Hampshire. Your grandfather's place. The revelation hit him like a physical blow. The lake house had been in the Merritt family for 3 generations. His grandfather had willed it directly to Law, knowing how much it meant to him. It was the only place Law had felt safe as a child, the only location tied to happy memories. That's not possible. Natalie can't sell it. It's not in her name. Russell slid another document across the table. You made her your power of attorney 3 years ago when you were having those surgeries on your knee. Law remembered. He'd undergone 3 operations after an old military injury flared up. The power of attorney was meant to be temporary, but he'd never revoked it. It hadn't seemed necessary. The sale closes tomorrow, Russell continued. They're meeting tonight with some documents before they leave town. I overheard them at the cafe. They mentioned Gardner Street storage. Where? Law's voice had gone dangerously quiet. Unit 423. They rented it under her name. Law stood, his mind calculating, planning. You have keys to this place? Russell hesitated, then went to a drawer. Got a buddy who works there. He handed over a key card. Law, what are you going to do? Law pocketed the card. Nothing they don't deserve. As he turned to leave, his phone rang. Unknown number. Mr. Merritt? An authoritative voice asked. This is Officer Reynolds with Boston PD. Sir, you need to come to your address. There's been an incident. Law's blood ran cold. What kind of incident? I'm not at liberty to say over the phone, sir. Please come as soon as possible. Law ended the call and looked at Russell. The police are in my house. Russell's eyes widened. You think Natalie? I don't know, but I'm going to find out. 20 minutes later, Law pulled into his driveway, now flanked by 2 police cruisers. As he approached the front door, he saw Natalie standing in the doorway, her face streaked with tears. Behind her stood his parents, Vernon and Patricia Merritt, who had supposedly been vacationing in Florida. His father stepped forward, gripping Law's arm with surprising strength for a man in his 70s. Son, she didn't mean for it to go this far. Natalie whimpered, her voice barely audible. Don't let him see the garage. Law shoved past them all, ignoring the protests of the officer who tried to block his path. He flung open the garage door and stopped dead. Russell lay on the concrete floor, blood pooling beneath his head. A uniformed officer knelt beside him, checking for vital signs and finding none. Next to Russell's body was a crowbar with distinctive handle markings. Law's crowbar, taken from the toolbox he kept in this very garage. Mr. Merritt, the officer approached cautiously. Your wife called us. She says she came home and found your brother like this. Do you have any idea what happened here? Law's mind raced. The pieces didn't fit. Why would Russell be here? Why would he drive separately? And then it clicked. He wouldn't. This was staged. Law turned slowly to face Natalie, whose tears now seemed calculated rather than genuine. His parents' presence made even less sense, until he remembered they'd always favored Russell, always jumped to his defense. Officer, Law said carefully, I think you should know that my brother contacted me earlier about my wife's affair. I was just with him at his apartment in Cambridge. The officer frowned. Sir, your wife says you've been unstable lately, angry about financial issues. She feared you might harm yourself or others. Law understood with crystal clarity. This wasn't just about an affair or selling the lake house. This was about framing him. They'd killed Russell, the only person who knew what they were planning, and set Law up to take the fall. As the officer began reading him his rights, Law caught sight of a small storage unit key that had fallen from Russell's pocket, partially hidden beneath his body. The same type Russell had given him minutes ago. He knew then what he had to do. The evidence that would exonerate him and condemn them was waiting at Gardner Street Storage. He just had to get to it. I'd like to speak to my lawyer, he said, his voice eerily calm as the handcuffs closed around his wrists. Chapter 3. Foundation of Vengeance. The interrogation room at Boston Police Department headquarters held a familiar chill. Law had been in rooms like this before, but on the other side of the table. During his military career, he'd conducted enough interrogations to know every technique. Detective Malone, a veteran cop with salt and pepper hair and tired eyes, took the seat across from him. Mr. Merritt, you're in a world of trouble. Law remained silent, his lawyer, Benjamin Hargrove, beside him. Ben was Ironclad's legal counsel and one of the few people Law genuinely trusted. We have your crowbar with your fingerprints covered in your brother's blood, Malone continued. Your wife and parents both state you've been increasingly paranoid, making accusations, threatening violence. Ask them about Gardner Street Storage. Unit 423, Law said evenly. The detective faltered. What? My brother discovered my wife was having an affair with Alexander Voss. They were planning to sell my family property and leave town tonight. The evidence is in that storage unit. Malone studied him. That's convenient. Check Russell's phone records. He called me twice tonight. Check the traffic cameras outside his Cambridge apartment building. You'll see me arriving and leaving. It's physically impossible for me to have killed him when your me says he died. Ben added, we're requesting you verify Mr. Merritt's alibi before proceeding further. 3 hours later, Law was released. The traffic cameras had confirmed his story, and the medical examiner had placed Russell's time of death during Law's documented visit to Cambridge. It wasn't enough to arrest anyone else, but it was enough to clear him temporarily. They'll try again, Ben warned as they left the station. They've invested too much in this plan. Law nodded, his expression unreadable. Give me everything you can on Alexander Voss. I want to know every skeleton in his closet. What about Natalie? Your parents? Law's eyes were cold. They chose their side. While Ben made calls, Law drove to Gardner Street Storage. The facility was deserted at 2 a.m. He used Russell's key card to enter, then made his way to Unit 423. Inside, he found what he expected: boxes of documents, a laptop, and several flash drives. He took everything. In his hotel room, Law methodically went through the evidence. The documents revealed a sophisticated plan. Alexander Voss wasn't just having an affair with Natalie. He was using her to access confidential patient information for Boston General. Specifically, patients participating in clinical trials for experimental treatments from competing pharmaceutical companies. This industrial espionage had been going on for over a year. The Lake House sale was just part of their exit strategy. They'd planned to frame Law for Russell's murder, ensuring he couldn't come after them while they disappeared with the proceeds from selling his property and the payoff from Helix Pharmaceuticals. Most damning of all was a series of text messages between Natalie and Voss, discussing how to handle Russell after he confronted them with his suspicions. Law's parents' involvement became clear too. Financial records showed large transfers from Voss to their accounts. They'd been paid to corroborate Natalie's story about Law's supposed instability. By morning, Law had compiled enough evidence to have them all arrested. But as the sun rose over Boston, he put the incriminating files aside. The legal system would give them deals, reduced sentences, perhaps even immunity for testimony. That wasn't good enough. They had taken everything from him: his brother, his marriage, his family legacy. They had tried to take his freedom. A conventional punishment wouldn't balance those scales. Law picked up his phone and called Garrett Sullivan. "I need the team," he said simply. "All of them. It's time to go to work." When Garrett arrived at the hotel with 5 other former special operators, men who had served with Law and now worked for Ironclad, Law laid out what had happened. "So what's the plan, boss?" asked Diego Contreras, Law's surveillance expert. Law unfolded a map of Boston. "We're not going to kill them. That's too quick, too clean." His finger traced a route across the city. "We're going to destroy them, piece by piece. Everything they care about, everything they are." He looked up at the men who had followed him through war zones and now stood ready to follow him through this personal hell. "By the time we're done, they'll wish they were dead." Chapter 4. The Architect's Design. 3 weeks passed. Law moved through the world like a ghost, watching his targets establish their new normal. They believed they were safe. Natalie had returned home after Law's release, maintaining her innocence while secretly communicating with Voss. His parents had gone back to Florida, confident the police would eventually find evidence against their eldest son. They were all wrong. Law had rented an apartment under a false name, converting the spare bedroom into an operations center. The walls were covered with photographs, timelines, and connection maps, a meticulous blueprint for dismantling 5 lives. "Surveillance is complete," Diego reported, entering with a fresh stack of photos. "Voss follows the same routine every day. Natalie's been careful, but they're meeting at the Marriott twice a week." Law pinned the new images to the wall. "And my parents? Your father's gambling again, for trips to the casino this week. Your mother's spending the money as fast as he loses it." Law nodded, unsurprised. His father's gambling addiction had destroyed their family finances decades ago. It seemed old habits returned quickly when cash was available. Garrett entered, carrying coffee. "Hospital board meeting minutes," he said, sliding a folder across the table. "Natalie's up for department chair next month. The vote looks favorable." Law opened the folder. Not for long. The final member of the team, Calvin Reese, arrived with a laptop. "I've finished analyzing Voss's financial records. He's leveraged to the hilt. The money he promised your parents was supposed to come from a bonus that's now in jeopardy. Helix is investigating data irregularities." Law smiled for the first time in weeks. Perfect. The men gathered around the table as Law outlined Phase 1. Calvin, I want everything Voss gave my parents back in their accounts by morning, plus an additional 50,000. Make it look like he's getting nervous, trying to buy more loyalty. Won't be a problem, Calvin replied. He'd been NSA before joining Law's team. Diego, I need photos of my father at the casino, my mother shopping, and the money transfers. Deliver them to Voss's private email with a message suggesting my parents are becoming a liability. Consider it done. Law turned to Garrett. It's time to introduce Dr. Reynolds to the hospital board. The following day, an anonymous package arrived at Boston General Hospital addressed to the board of directors. Inside was a detailed dossier documenting how Dr. Natalie Merritt had accessed confidential patient files outside her department, files connected to clinical trials from pharmaceutical companies competing with Helix. Simultaneously, an SEC whistleblower report was filed against Alexander Voss, detailing suspicious stock transactions timed perfectly with the release of competitors' trial results. That evening, Law watched from his car as Natalie emerged from the hospital, her face ashen. Her phone rang. Voss, no doubt, experiencing his own professional implosion. Law didn't need to hear the conversation to know its content. Panic. Accusations. The first cracks in their alliance. He followed Natalie to a bar where she met Voss. Through the window, he watched their heated exchange, saw Voss grab her arm too tightly, noticed how she pulled away with newfound fear in her eyes. Phase 1 was complete. Doubt had been planted. 2 days later, Natalie received another package, this one at home. Inside were photos of Voss meeting with Law's parents, handing over an envelope. The timestamp showed it was after Russell's murder. A note read, "Who do you think he'll sacrifice first?" Meanwhile, Voss found his corporate credit cards suddenly maxed out with charges at escort services. His ex-wife received documentation of undisclosed assets from their divorce. The IRS received an anonymous tip about offshore accounts. Law orchestrated it all with cold precision, each move designed to isolate his targets, turn them against each other, and systematically dismantle the foundations of their lives. "They're crumbling," Garrett observed as they watched Natalie and Voss argue in the Marriott parking lot a week later. "She slapped him." Law nodded. Phase 2 begins tomorrow. The next morning, Detective Malone received a package containing partial evidence from the storage unit. Enough to reopen the investigation into Russell's death, but not enough to immediately arrest anyone. When police arrived at Voss's office with questions, security footage showed him become physically ill, vomiting in a trash can before fleeing the building. That night, Natalie didn't come home. Law's parents called her repeatedly, leaving increasingly frantic messages. They could sense the tide turning. Law watched from the shadows as his carefully constructed demolition plan executed flawlessly. The architect of their destruction remained invisible while they tore each other apart brick by brick. Chapter 5. The Excavation. 1 month into his campaign, Law decided it was time to dig deeper. Surface destruction wasn't enough. He needed to expose the foundations. "What do we know about Voss before Helix?" he asked his team. Calvin pulled up a series of documents. He worked for 3 pharmaceutical companies in 5 years. Left each one under unusual circumstances. Unusual how? Nothing official in his record, but I found sealed court documents. Calvin opened a file. 2 sexual harassment settlements and 1 accusation of data manipulation that was dropped when the witness suddenly recanted. Law absorbed this information. Find the witnesses. All of them. Within days, they had names and locations. The sexual harassment victims, both former administrative assistants, had signed NDAs with substantial payouts. The data manipulation whistleblower had left the industry entirely, now teaching high school chemistry in New Hampshire. Law dispatched Diego to approach the teacher, Nathan Browning, while he personally visited the first harassment victim, Melissa Davidson. He found her working at a small marketing firm in Providence. When he introduced himself, her reaction told him everything. "I have nothing to say about Alexander Voss," she said, voice tight with anxiety. "I'm not here to cause trouble," Law assured her. "I'm here because he's hurting more people." Her resistance crumbled slowly as Law explained the situation. carefully omitting his relationship to the players involved. He presented himself as a private investigator working with other victims. The NDA doesn't protect criminal behavior, he reminded her gently. And you wouldn't be alone this time. By the end of their conversation, she'd agreed to contact the other victim and consider coming forward. Meanwhile, Diego reported success with Nathan Browning. He's been waiting for this moment, Diego said. Says Voss falsified clinical trial data that could have harmed patients. He only recanted because Voss threatened his family. Law added these new threads to his web. Get them all to Detective Malone. Anonymous tips, but credible ones. While the police investigation intensified, Law turned his attention to Natalie. Her professional reputation was already damaged by the board's investigation, but he wanted to understand what had transformed the woman he thought he knew into someone capable of murder. Calvin discovered the answer in her email archives. Years of correspondence between Natalie and Voss predated their affair. They'd known each other since medical school, maintained contact through mutual colleagues, and reconnected at a conference 18 months ago. More disturbing were draft emails Natalie had never sent, journal entries she'd typed but never published. They revealed a woman who had grown to resent her husband's intensity, his absolutism, his uncompromising nature. She'd felt trapped in his shadow, her own ambitions secondary to his. Law read these private thoughts without emotion, analyzing them as he would intelligence reports on an enemy combatant. The woman who had written these words was a stranger to him now. The final piece fell into place when Calvin uncovered Voss's financial motives. His lavish lifestyle had left him deeply in debt. The industrial espionage at Boston General had been his idea, with promises of executive promotion and bonuses once the stolen research helped Helix outperform competitors. Law's parents were simpler. They'd always favored Russell and resented Law's success after they'd repeatedly predicted his failure. The money was just a bonus on top of helping their preferred son. As for Russell's murder, the evidence suggested an opportunistic decision rather than a long-planned action. Russell had confronted them at the wrong moment, threatened to expose everything, and Voss had reacted violently. Natalie and his parents had helped cover it up, seeing a chance to solve multiple problems at once by framing Law. With the complete picture now clear, Law finalized Phase 3, the controlled demolition. First, he anonymously delivered Voss's hidden offshore account details to Helix's board of directors, the SEC, and the FBI simultaneously. Next, he arranged for Natalie's private journal entries, the ones expressing her resentment, to reach Voss through an untraceable email, suggesting Natalie was preparing to cooperate with authorities and blame everything on him. For his parents, he sent financial records showing Voss had been transferring funds back out of their accounts. A manipulation by Calvin, but they wouldn't know that. Then he waited, watching the inevitable implosion through surveillance cameras Diego had planted. Voss confronted Natalie at her office, accusing her of betrayal. Their argument became so heated that hospital security intervened, creating an official incident report. Law's parents called Voss repeatedly, demanding explanations for the missing money. When he refused to answer, they panicked and booked flights back to Boston. The trap was set. All the principal players would soon be in one location, each believing the others had betrayed them, each desperate to save themselves. Law looked at the chaos he had orchestrated and felt nothing but cold satisfaction. The excavation was complete. Now it was time to collapse the entire structure. Chapter 6. The cornerstones crumble. The breaking point came faster than even Law had anticipated. Alexander Voss was arrested outside his apartment building on securities fraud charges. The FBI had moved quickly on the evidence they'd received. Law watched from across the street as Voss was led away, still wearing pajama bottoms with his hastily donned dress shirt. Within hours, news of the arrest reached Natalie. Law observed through the surveillance equipment as she frantically packed a suitcase, making calls that went unanswered. Her carefully constructed world was collapsing, and her accomplices were nowhere to be found. His parents arrived in Boston that afternoon, checking into a downtown hotel rather than going to Law's house where Natalie still lived. Their distrust was growing. All these developments pleased Law, but it wasn't enough. They were scattering, each looking to escape individually. He needed them together for his final act. "It's time for me to make contact," he told his team that evening. Garrett frowned. "You sure that's wise? Right now, they think you're oblivious." Law checked his watch. "That changes tonight." At precisely 8 p.m., Law called his parents' hotel room. "Hello, Father," he said when Vernon answered. The silence that followed was deafening. "Lawrence," Vernon finally managed, voice shaking. "We've been worried about you." "No, you haven't," Law replied evenly. "But you should be now." Before Vernon could respond, Law continued. "I know everything. About Russell. About Natalie and Voss. About the money. And I have proof." "Son, you're confused. I'm meeting Natalie at the lake house tomorrow at noon. You and Mother should be there too. One chance to explain yourselves before I take everything to Detective Malone." He hung up without waiting for a response, then sent Natalie a text message. "I know about Voss. Meet me at the lake house tomorrow at noon if you want a chance to explain before I go to the police." His final call was to Voss's attorney, informing him that he had evidence proving Voss had murdered Russell Merritt and framed Lawrence Merritt for the crime. He offered to bring this evidence to the lake house at noon the following day, suggesting it might help with bail negotiations. The pieces were in motion. The next morning, Law's team established positions around the lake house. The remote property, situated on 20 wooded acres with its own dock on Lake Winnipesaukee, offered perfect isolation for what would follow. Law entered alone at 11 a.m., carrying a briefcase containing the complete evidence of their crimes. He set it on the large oak dining table, the same table where his grandfather had taught him to play chess, where he'd learned that sometimes you had to sacrifice pieces to win the game. Natalie arrived first, 30 minutes early, hoping to speak to Law alone. She froze when she saw him standing by the fireplace, his expression unreadable. "Law," she began, her voice attempting warmth while her eyes darted nervously. "Thank you for giving me a chance to explain." He didn't respond, merely gesturing toward a chair. She sat, clutching her purse like a shield. "I know how this looks, but Alex and it wasn't planned. It just happened. And then things got complicated with his work, and—" "Stop lying," Law said quietly. "I know everything. The patient files. The insider trading. Russell." The color drained from her face. "Russell was an accident. Alex got angry, they fought. In my garage? With my crowbar? That's quite an accident." Before she could fabricate more excuses, the door opened again. Vernon and Patricia entered, faltering when they saw Natalie already there. "Sit down," Law commanded, and his parents obeyed instinctively. Minutes later, a luxury SUV pulled into the driveway. Alexander Voss had made bail. He entered cautiously, surprise registering when he saw the assembled group. "What is this?" he demanded. Law smiled without humor. "This is Judgment Day." He opened the briefcase, removing 5 identical folders. He placed one in front of each person, keeping one for himself. "Inside, you'll find comprehensive documentation of your crimes. Securities fraud, industrial espionage, conspiracy to commit murder, obstruction of justice." The accusations hung in the air like smoke. The police have received copies as well, but with a time delay. They'll arrive in approximately. He checked his watch. 1 hour. Panic erupted. Voss lunged for the door, only to find it blocked by Garrett. Natalie began sobbing. Vernon turned purple with rage, while Patricia seemed to shrink in her chair. "Why are you doing this?" Natalie cried. "If you know everything, why not just let the police handle it?" Law's expression hardened. "Because the legal system might show mercy." "I won't." He retrieved a remote control from his pocket and pressed a button. The large television screen on the wall activated, showing footage of Russell confronting Voss and Natalie at the storage unit. The argument escalated until Voss struck Russell with the crowbar. The murder captured in horrifying clarity. "You recorded it," Voss whispered, staggered. "Russell did," Law corrected. "My brother was smarter than you gave him credit for. He suspected you might try something, so he set up a camera. His final gift to me." This was a lie. Calvin had created the footage using deepfake technology and footage from the storage facility security cameras, but they couldn't know that. "What do you want?" Vernon finally asked, his arrogance crumbling. Law sat at the head of the table, folding his hands. I want you to destroy each other. He pushed a document toward the center of the table. This is a confession for Russell's murder. One of you needs to sign it in the next 30 minutes, or all of you go down together. You're insane, Voss spat. Law leaned forward. No, I'm giving you a chance one of you doesn't deserve. For people in this room were involved in killing my brother and framing me. One of you actually wielded the crowbar. That person should pay the most severe price. He let the implication hang. One confession might lead to a deal. Collective denial would damn them all equally. The psychological trap was elegant in its simplicity. Law had designed it to exploit the fractures he'd been creating for weeks. Now, under pressure, those fractures would become chasms. It began with accusations. Voss claiming Natalie had suggested framing Law, Natalie insisting the murder was entirely Voss's idea, Vernon and Patricia protesting they'd only helped afterward out of fear. As the minutes ticked by, the accusations grew more specific, more damning. Details emerged that even Law hadn't known. How Natalie had given Voss the garage code, how his mother had suggested using Law's crowbar, how his father had helped position Russell's body. Law recorded everything, adding new evidence to their collective doom while watching the people who had betrayed him tear each other apart. When police sirens sounded in the distance, genuine panic set in. Voss grabbed the confession, scrawling his name with a caveat that the others had been equal participants. Natalie lunged for it, trying to add her own version. Vernon attempted to flee through the back door, only to be stopped by Diego. As officers surrounded the house, Law stood calmly. His revenge wasn't in seeing them arrested. That was merely justice. His revenge was in watching them betray each other as thoroughly as they had betrayed him, destroying any chance of unified defense or mitigated sentences. He had orchestrated their complete destruction, and as Detective Malone led them away in handcuffs, their faces contorted with hatred for each other rather than for him. Law knew his vengeance was complete. Or so he thought. Chapter 7. The Inspection. 6 months passed. The trial of Alexander Voss for the murder of Russell Merritt dominated Boston media. Natalie and Law's parents faced lesser charges as accessories, each with separate attorneys throwing the others under the proverbial bus. Law testified clinically, describing the frame-up attempt without emotion. The jury took only 4 hours to convict Voss. He received life without parole. Natalie accepted a plea deal for 20 years. Vernon and Patricia Merritt, despite their advanced age, were sentenced to 15 years each. Justice had been served, but Law felt no closure. He stood on the dock of the lake house, watching the sunset paint the water crimson. The property that had nearly been stolen from him now felt tainted by their betrayal. He'd considered selling it, but couldn't bring himself to part with his grandfather's legacy. Garrett approached, footsteps creaking on the wooden planks. It's over, boss. You won. Law didn't turn. Then why doesn't it feel like victory? Because you lost too much in the process. This simple truth hung between them. Law had destroyed his enemies, but they had taken parts of him first. His marriage, his brother, his faith in family. The team's worried about you, Garrett continued. You've been different since the trial. Law finally faced his friend. I've been efficient, focused. You've been obsessed. Ironclad is thriving, but you're working 20-hour days, sleeping on your office couch. That's not living, Law. That's existing. Law had no answer for this. Since the trial, he'd poured himself into ironclad security, expanding operations, pursuing government contracts with relentless determination. The company had doubled in size, but as Garrett implied, success felt hollow. I have a proposition, Garrett said. The government contract in Kiev. Send me instead. Take some time off. Law frowned. I don't need time off. Yes, you do. You need to figure out what comes next. The vengeance chapter is finished. What's the next chapter about? The question lingered as Garrett left Law alone with his thoughts. That night, Law dreamed of Russell for the first time since his death. They were fishing on the lake, as they had done as children. Dream Russell looked at him with sad eyes. You got them, big brother. But at what cost? Law woke before dawn, the question echoing. He drove back to Boston in silence, his mind churning. At the office, he found Calvin working early, as usual. I need information, Law said without preamble. Calvin nodded, unsurprised. On who? Alexander Voss. Everything before Boston. Family, relationships, business dealings. I thought we were done with him. There's something missing. A piece I never found. Calvin hesitated, then nodded. I'll dig deeper. What exactly are we looking for? I don't know yet, Law admitted. But Voss was too confident, too protected. Someone was watching his back. While Calvin worked, Law reviewed the trial transcripts. Something had bothered him during Voss's testimony. A reference to a mentor who had guided his career, someone powerful enough to make problems disappear. The name had never been mentioned, dismissed by the prosecutor as irrelevant to the murder charge. 3 days later, Calvin brought the answer. Philip Donovan, he said, dropping a file on Law's desk. CEO of Meridian Pharmaceuticals. He's been Voss's shadow benefactor for 15 years. Law opened the file. Philip Donovan, 65, had built Meridian from a small research outfit into a pharmaceutical giant. His company had acquired or destroyed numerous competitors through methods that occasionally skirted legality, but never quite crossed the line into provable criminality. What's the connection to Voss? Voss was engaged to Donovan's daughter Catherine during graduate school. The engagement ended, but Donovan kept Voss in his orbit. I found a pattern. Wherever Voss worked, Meridian benefited from insider information. Law studied Donovan's photograph, distinguished, silver-haired, with cold eyes that reminded him uncomfortably of his own father. Donovan visited Voss in jail 3 times before the trial, Calvin continued, always as legal counsel to avoid recordings. The missing piece clicked into place. Voss hadn't been working alone. He'd been Donovan's proxy. The industrial espionage, the data theft from Boston General, it had all served Meridian's interests. Donovan let Voss take the fall, Law mused. Sacrificed him when he became a liability. Like a good chess player, Calvin agreed, knowing Law's fondness for the game. Law made his decision. I want everything on Donovan. Family, finances, weaknesses. You're not done, are you? Calvin asked quietly. Justice isn't complete, Law replied. The man who truly benefited from Russell's death is still free. The investigation into Philip Donovan consumed the next month. Law approached it methodically, building a comprehensive profile of the man who had manipulated Voss and indirectly caused Russell's death. The picture that emerged was of a brilliant but ruthless businessman who viewed people as assets to be used and discarded. His daughter Catherine had left the country after breaking her engagement to Voss, establishing a medical practice in Switzerland. His wife had died under mysterious circumstances 15 years earlier. His son Michael worked reluctantly in Meridian's legal department. Most importantly, Law discovered Donovan's vulnerability, an experimental treatment for early-onset Alzheimer's being developed in secret. Donovan had been diagnosed 3 years earlier, but had kept the condition hidden while pursuing aggressive treatment options, including using stolen research for Boston General's clinical trials. The final piece fell into place when Calvin uncovered communications between Donovan and Natalie dating back before her affair with Voss. She had been Donovan's inside person at the hospital before Voss re-entered the picture. She was playing both sides, Law realized, using Voss to cover her tracks with Donovan. With this knowledge, Law formulated a new plan, not for vengeance this time, but for justice. Philip Donovan needed to answer for his role in the conspiracy that had killed Russell. But unlike his previous campaign, Law would not operate in the shadows. This time, he would bring Donovan into the light. Chapter 8. The Reinforcement. Law's approach to Philip Donovan required a different strategy than he'd used with Voss and the others. Donovan was too powerful, too insulated to be destroyed through conventional means. We need leverage, Law told his team. But more importantly, we need public exposure. The plan centered around Donovan's hidden Alzheimer's diagnosis and the illegal means he'd employed to obtain treatment. If they could prove Meridian had stolen research and compromised clinical trials, the scandal would destroy both Donovan and his company. We need someone on the inside, Garrett observed. Law nodded. Michael Donovan, the son. Michael Donovan presented an opportunity, a reluctant participant in his father's empire. a man who had chosen law over medicine to please his father, but harbored resentment over the direction of the company. Law arranged a seemingly chance meeting at a charity gala both were attending. As they discussed the pharmaceutical industry's ethical challenges, Law carefully steered the conversation toward Meridian's practices without revealing his true interest. The line between aggressive research and patient exploitation has become blurred, Michael commented, his tone suggesting personal concern. Law recognized an opening. Some would say Meridian crossed that line with the Alzheimer's trials. Michael stiffened slightly. What do you know about those trials? Enough to be concerned, Law replied, particularly about where the research originated. Their conversation ended with an agreement to meet again privately. Law had planted the seed. Now he needed to nurture it into full disclosure. Over the following weeks, Law cultivated a careful relationship with Michael, positioning himself as a potential ally rather than an adversary. He shared selective information about Voss's industrial espionage without revealing his personal connection to the case. The breakthrough came during their fourth meeting. "My father is dying," Michael confided after several drinks. "The treatments bought him time, but they're failing now. His mind is going, and he's becoming desperate. Desperate enough to compromise patient safety?" Law asked carefully. Michael's silence was answer enough. "I can help you stop him," Law offered, "but I need evidence." The decision visibly weighed on Michael. Family loyalty battled with professional ethics. Finally, he nodded. "Give me a week." 6 days later, Michael delivered a flash drive containing internal Meridian documents that confirmed everything: the theft of Boston General's research, the compromised clinical trials, and most damning, direct communication between Philip Donovan and Natalie Merritt establishing their arrangement before Voss became involved. "What will you do with this?" Michael asked, clearly conflicted. "What should have been done months ago?" Law replied. "The truth needs to come out." Law's team verified the document's authenticity before proceeding. The evidence was irrefutable. Philip Donovan had orchestrated the entire operation, using Voss and Natalie as disposable pawns. When complications arose, he had abandoned them to their fate, protecting himself and Meridian from fallout. With the evidence secured, Law moved to Phase 2, reinforcing justice. First, he delivered comprehensive documentation to the FBI, SEC, and FDA simultaneously. The evidence detailed Meridian's criminal activities without revealing Law's personal connection or Michael's involvement. Next, he arranged for key documents to reach medical ethics boards and patient advocacy groups, ensuring the scandal couldn't be quietly handled through financial settlements. Finally, he contacted Catherine Donovan in Switzerland, sharing evidence of her father's criminal activities and the destruction left in his wake. Though they never spoke directly, her response came in the form of a statement to prosecutors, confirming what she had witnessed during her engagement to Voss. The Donovan empire began to crumble. Meridian's stock plummeted as federal investigations were announced. Clinical trials were suspended pending review. Philip Donovan was forced to step down as CEO while the board attempted damage control. Law watched the collapse from a distance, finding no satisfaction in Donovan's downfall, only a sense that the scales of justice were finally balancing. When federal agents arrived at Donovan's estate to execute search warrants, Law observed from his car across the street. The once powerful man who emerged between FBI agents appeared diminished, confused, his Alzheimer's symptoms apparently accelerating under stress. That evening, Law received an unexpected call from Detective Malone. "Voss is talking," Malone said without preamble, claiming Donovan was the mastermind all along. "Says your brother figured it out, and that's why he had to die. Is that going to help Voss?" Law asked, his voice neutral. "No, but it might extend Natalie's sentence." She knew more than she admitted. After they hung up, Law sat in silence, processing this final confirmation. The justice system was now addressing what his revenge had not: the full scope of responsibility for Russell's death. The next morning, Michael Donovan requested a meeting. They sat at a quiet corner table in an empty restaurant. "My father tried to kill himself last night," Michael said, his expression haunted. "He left a confession. It's comprehensive." Law absorbed this without visible reaction. I'm sorry it came to this. Michael studied him. You're not who I thought you were when we met. This wasn't just about corporate whistleblowing for you, was it? No, Law admitted. But my reasons don't change the truth of what your father did. He mentioned someone named Russell in his confession. Said he authorized Voss to handle the problem when Russell threatened exposure. Law's composure nearly broke at hearing his brother's name. Russell was my brother. Voss murdered him on your father's implicit authorization. Understanding dawned in Michael's eyes. You orchestrated all of this. The investigations, the exposure. Justice needed reinforcement. Michael didn't argue the point. Instead, he asked, what happens now? Now justice takes its course, Law replied. Your father faces consequences for his actions. Meridian either reforms or dissolves. The people harmed by stolen research get answers. And you? Michael pressed. What do you get? Law considered the question. Closure, he finally said, though he wasn't certain he believed it. Chapter 9. The Foundation Stands. 1 year after Russell's murder, Law stood before his brother's grave. The cemetery was quiet in the early morning light, dew glistening on the granite headstone. It's done, Law said softly. All of them are paying for what they did to you. Philip Donovan had died awaiting trial, his Alzheimer's accelerated by stress and the cessation of experimental treatments. Meridian Pharmaceuticals had been dismantled, its legitimate assets sold to competitors, its tainted research discredited. Natalie, following additional charges related to her collaboration with Donovan, had received an extended sentence. She would be in her 60s before release. Law's parents remained incarcerated, their appeals denied. They had written to him several times, seeking forgiveness as their health declined in prison. Those letters remained unopened in his desk drawer. Justice had been served, comprehensive and uncompromising. Yet standing at Russell's grave, Law still felt incomplete. You'd probably tell me to move on, he continued, placing a hand on the cool stone. You always were better at that part. The wind rustled through nearby trees, a sound that had always brought Law peace at the lake house. He had finally decided to keep the property, renovating it to remove the stain of betrayal while preserving his grandfather's legacy. As he turned to leave, he noticed a woman standing nearby, mid-30s, professionally dressed, watching him with an uncertain expression. Mr. Merritt, she said as he approached. I'm Dr. Harper Browning. I worked with your brother at Mass General. Law vaguely recalled Russell mentioning a colleague named Harper. You were in the research department. She nodded. Russell and I were collaborating on something before he died. Something important. Law studied her, assessing. What kind of something? A treatment protocol for PTSD in combat veterans. Russell was passionate about it because of your military background. He said if we could help even one soldier suffer less than his brother had, it would be worth it. The revelation hit Law like a physical blow. He'd known Russell was working in psychiatric research, but hadn't known the focus had been inspired by him. I've continued the work, Harper explained. We're ready for clinical trials, but funding is an issue since the Donovan scandal. Many pharmaceutical companies are hesitant to back psychiatric research right now. Why are you telling me this? Because Russell believed in this project, and he believed in you. Before he died, he told me if we ever hit a wall, you were the one person who could break through it. He said you never gave up on anything that mattered. Law absorbed this, hearing his brother's voice in her words. Send the research to my office. I'll have my team review it. She handed him a business card. Thank you for considering it. Russell will be grateful. As she walked away, Law felt something shift inside him, the first stirring of purpose beyond vengeance. 2 weeks later, Law called a meeting with his executive team at Ironclad. Garrett, Diego, and Calvin listened intently as he outlined his proposal. I want to establish a foundation in Russell's name, he explained, focused on innovative PTSD treatments for veterans. We'll fund the research directly. No pharmaceutical partnerships. Garrett leaned forward. This is the project his colleague brought you? Law nodded. It's promising work. More importantly, it's what Russell cared about. Ironclad has the resources, Calvin confirmed. But this would be a significant pivot from our current operations. Not a pivot, Law corrected. An expansion. We'll continue our security contracts while developing the foundation. Many of our employees are veterans who could benefit directly from this research. The team discussed logistics, funding mechanisms, and organizational structure. By meeting's end, the Russell Merritt Foundation for Combat Trauma Research had taken preliminary shape. In the months that followed, Law threw himself into establishing the foundation with the same intensity he'd once directed toward vengeance. He recruited top researchers, secured facilities, and personally interviewed veterans willing to participate in trials. Dr. Harper Browning agreed to lead the research team, bringing Russell's original vision to the project. Her dedication matched Law's own, creating a partnership that gradually evolved beyond professional collaboration. One evening, as they reviewed preliminary results in Law's office, Harper asked the question others had avoided. Do you ever regret how things ended with them? Your wife, your parents. Law considered this carefully. I regret that they forced those endings. I regret Russell paid the price for their choices. But I don't regret ensuring they face consequences. That's not forgiveness, she observed. No, he agreed. Some betrayals can't be forgiven. Harper nodded, accepting his answer without judgment. Russell said you were the most principled person he'd ever known, uncompromising in your convictions. Some would call that a flaw. Russell called it your foundation. He said when everything else crumbled, you would still be standing. The words resonated with unexpected power. Through all the destruction, the unraveling of his marriage, the loss of his family, the death of his brother, Law had indeed remained standing. Damaged but unbroken, his core principles intact. 2 years to the day after Russell's murder, Law returned to the lake house. The renovation was complete, erasing the physical reminders of betrayal while honoring the property's place in his family history. Garrett joined him on the dock, both men watching the sunset as they had many times before. The Foundation's first treatment protocol got FDA approval, Garrett noted. Russell would be proud. Law nodded, allowing himself to acknowledge the achievement. It's a start. You're never going to completely move on, are you? Garrett asked, not unkindly. No, Law admitted, but I'm moving forward. The distinction was important. Moving on implied forgetting, forgiving, releasing the past entirely. Law would never forgive those who had taken Russell from him, never forget their betrayal, never release them from accountability for their actions. But moving forward, that he could do, building something meaningful from the ruins of betrayal, honoring Russell's memory through work that mattered, finding purpose beyond vengeance. As darkness fell over the lake, Law made peace not with his enemies, but with himself. He had survived their best efforts to destroy him.